only on America's streaming service.
And when I took that one step, everything changed. In that moment, I don't know if I knew if I was going to make it or not.
Inside the fight for recovery and drive to overcome any obstacle.
I didn't lose my legs. I was given a second chance at life. You can be the resentment of war, or you can be the resilience of war.
Watch A Live Day, Johnny Joey Jones. Available now on Fox Nation. Get a copy of Sean Hannity's new book when you join today. Go to foxnation.com for details.
That's the story for this Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. Thanks for spending your evening with us. The story continues, though, so we'll see you back here tomorrow at 7 for President Trump's rally in Michigan. Have a great night, everybody. See you then.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Here's a fact that'll make you blink. We are now approaching the 19th anniversary of the arrival of American troops in Afghanistan. They're still there, despite repeated promises from politicians on both sides. They're not going anywhere for the meantime, and Americans are still dying there. That's true in Iraq, too. We've had troops in Iraq for 17 years. Why are they there? No one knows why they're there, or at least no one will say so out loud with any clarity. Many thousands of American servicemen are deployed in many dozens of countries around the world and have been for generations. Now, in some cases, there may very well be a good reason they're there. In many other cases, though, we just don't talk about it. You're not allowed to. In Washington, mindless interventionism is very much a bipartisan project. Both parties support it. Just this summer, Republicans and Democrats reached a rare moment of unity. They joined together to demand that we keep thousands of American troops in Germany, where they've been for 75 years. Why should they stay another 75? Well, presumably to keep the Soviet Union from invading Hamburg. Maybe there's another reason. No one mentioned what that reason might be. The more troops we send overseas, the better. That is one thing virtually everyone in Washington agrees on, except Donald Trump. Trump, whatever you think of him, does not agree. He does not believe that, and he said so for the last 5 years. Trump has been talking relentlessly about bringing the troops home from countries around the world. And maybe more than any other single reason, talk like that makes official Washington hate Donald Trump. Last night, the White House announced that we're finally bringing home many American soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan. And you would think there would be widespread celebration. That means families united, Americans out of harm's way. But very few in Washington are celebrating. The press corps, including some people who should know better, are still busy telling you how much Donald Trump hates the troops and wants them to die, the guy who's bringing them home. Add that to the irony file, which is bulging. So what exactly is going on here? Well, one clue comes from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, a woman called Laura Cooper. Cooper testified before Congress during the impeachment proceedings last year. And during those proceedings, she said that Pentagon officials began receiving, quote, phone calls from industry. In other words, calls from private companies that produce and supply weapons and military hardware to our military, after the White House put a hold on high-priced military aid to Ukraine. So weapons manufacturers wanted more weapons flowing into Ukraine because they wanted to make money from the sale of those weapons. It's not complicated. And they knew they could pressure the Pentagon to override a decision by the democratically elected President of the United States. That's what they did. This happens a lot, and everyone in Washington knows it. On Labor Day, the president finally said this out loud. He called out the defense industry for the first time in decades. Watch this.
Biden shipped away our jobs, threw open our borders, and sent our youth to fight in these crazy, endless wars. And it's one of the reasons the military, I'm not saying the military is in love with me, the soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't, because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy.
So there's a lot of truth in that. And the President of the United States would know. And precisely because a lot of what Trump said is true, Donald Trump was not allowed to say it out loud. Democrats and the media were enraged that he said that. Nearly half of senior Defense Department officials are linked with military contractors. No one ever says that out loud. And if you do, what do you hate the troops? What is going on here? You might think it's purely partisan, that this dishonesty is a way to get rid of Trump and install Joe Biden and his handlers. And there's no doubt that that's part of what's going on. But there's something bigger. Democrats, and some Republicans, by the way, are priming the public for a revival of interventionism if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are elected. If they make it to the White House, Biden and Harris are planning a new war, this one in the faraway and strategically irrelevant nation of Syria. They're not even trying to hide that. And they haven't been for a long time. Back in 2018, we were told we need to intervene in Syria immediately because Bashar al-Assad, the leader of that country, had used chemical weapons against his own people. Every channel told you that. This show noted correctly that there wasn't actually any evidence that had happened. Despite what they were telling you, there was a lot of lying going on. And that's never been proven, by the way, despite what they say. But the left didn't even ask questions. They swallowed the whole thing whole the first day. Watch the hysterics about it on MSNBC.
If Vladimir Putin masterminded the last week in Syria, he has gotten everything he could have asked for. Do a small chemical attack, nothing like the big ones you've done in the past, and then Donald Trump can fire some missiles at Syria that'll do no real damage, and then the American news media will change the subject from Russian influence in the Trump campaign and the Trump transition and the Trump White House. It's perfect.
Oh, it's perfect. This is lunacy. Who cares how much of Syria Vladimir Putin controls? Good luck with it. Rational people who cared about the United States realized that Syria was a classic quagmire, and there was no obvious advantage for us, the U.S., in committing large numbers of troops there. We argued at the time that a foreign war staged on behalf of the so-called Syrian rebels, many of them, in fact, Islamic extremists who hate our country, was unwise. It was obviously unwise. In the end, the president settled on firing some rockets into Syria. It was a very short story. But this enraged official Washington. Bureaucratic tapeworms like John Bolton were furious. Bolton declared that the absence of a total all-out war with massive American troop commitment was a, quote, personal crisis. Later, the president said we were pulling entirely out of Syria. He memorably called Syria a land of sand and death. The Syrian civil war is still ongoing, by the way, and for war-porn purveyors like John Bolton and other liberals, it's still an opportunity. At a fundraiser this summer, Joe Biden declared that the president's approach to Syria is not enough. Crippling, unprecedented sanctions are not enough, Biden said. We need to escalate in Syria. Now, you've seen this logic before. We saw it in Iraq. That was bipartisan. Joe Biden supported the Iraq war. He doesn't want to talk about it now. When asked about it by a veteran, he used the tragic death of his son from cancer as a shield from the question. Watch.
I'm an Air Force veteran. I'm an Army veteran. We're just wondering why we should vote for someone who voted for a war and killed thousands of our brothers and sisters. My friends are dead. So is my son who was in Iraq. Okay? I'm not going after your son. You better remember. I'm not. No, I'm not going after your son. You were disqualified, sir. Disqualified.
So this moment is bewildering to people who haven't followed the shifts in American politics over the last 30 years. Liberals used to say they were against war. Give peace a chance. Remember that? Now, Joe Biden's unquestioning support for wars that don't help this country at all, is one of his chief qualifications as a Democratic nominee. In May, Biden's foreign policy advisor, Tony Blinken, confirmed that a Joe Biden administration would be eager to get the United States into a war in Syria. Blinken described American troops in Syria, that would be Americans risking their lives, as a form of, quote, leverage. Right. Blinken vowed that Joe Biden will return to Syria in force if he wins in November.
And to the extent the United States had any remaining leverage in Syria to try to effectuate some more positive outcome, unfortunately, the Trump administration has more or less torn that up too, pulling out entirely. In Syria has taken away significant leverage.
Leverage for what? How does this help us? Nobody ever answers the simplest of all questions, the most profound, the only question that matters. Blinken added that it is, quote, virtually impossible for him to imagine a Biden administration normalizing relations with Assad's government. Again, he didn't even address how sanctioning Syria helps the United States, because that's not the point. It is never the point. Last night, John Kerry made the case on MSNBC that no one loves the troops more than John Kerry does. Of course, the Obama administration may have lied about its plans to withdraw from Afghanistan. It didn't. Of course, the Obama administration turned the nation of Libya into a hellscape of civil war and slavery. But trust me, says John Kerry, I love the troops. Watch.
We have a president who is not protecting our troops, not protecting the interests of the United States of America. These young men and women are extraordinary in today's generation. They serve willingly, they're volunteers, and they deserve certainly the respect of the commander-in-chief, if not every single American.
Oh, okay. So John Kerry respects our troops so much, but he would like to send them to countries you can't find on a map, put them in places where they may die for purposes that have nothing to do with our national security or the advancement of American interests, only to support crumbling post-war international institutions that everyone knows is a joke and are going away. That's John Kerry. He respects our troops. It was just last month that Kerry, who again, unlike Trump, cares about the truth and the troops, took the stage of the Democratic National Convention and longed for the days when hundreds of thousands of our soldiers died in World War II. Watch.
The only thing exceptional about the incoherent Trump foreign policy is that it has made our nation more isolated than ever before. On June 6, 1944, young Americans gave their lives on the beaches of Normandy to liberate the world from tyranny. Out of the ashes of that war, we made peace and rebuilt the world. That was and remains exceptional. It is the opposite of everything Donald Trump stands for.
Oh, that was the Golden Book's version of World War II. Cliche piled upon cliche, mindless. It's propaganda. Democratic voters are starting to believe it. One poll shows that among people who voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, just 26% now support withdrawing troops from Syria. Pollsters didn't ask why they should stay, but almost no Democrats are for pulling them out. By contrast, nearly 60% oppose pulling out. Trump voters overwhelmingly support withdrawing from Syria. They must hate the troops, wanting them home instead of suffering for years in some remote country that has no connection to the United States. What is going on here exactly? Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is a senior fellow and military expert for defense priorities, and we are happy to have him on the show tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How is it that the president, who has done more to withdraw American troops from war zones, is the guy who hates the troops?
Well, you got to look at everything in context, Tucker, and in context from the very beginning, going all the way back to the 2016 campaign. President Trump has been saying he wants no more stupid wars, wants no more regime change wars, and he's been on that. From the very first few months that he was in office, he went about immediately trying to say, why do we need any troops in Afghanistan? Let's get the troops out of Afghanistan. That's been covered in many places here. But you see something that started right then, and it's gone all the way through. He was immediately pushed back by his most senior advisors, by whether it's generals, whether it's civilian people, everyone in establishment Washington, as you said, both Republican and Democrat, pushed back on that. And eventually President Trump said, well, I'm going to defer to the professionals this time. But now then you see that after he sees year after year after year of the same thing, of everyone resisting any attempt to get out of anywhere, even though there's no actual national security threat to the United States that these things are preventing, he's now finally saying, you know what? Forget it. I'm the commander-in-chief, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to get out of we're going to reduce the troops in Germany, we're going to reduce the troops in Iraq, and we're going to reduce the troops in Afghanistan, and I hope those continue on until we get out. But he absolutely is in the right here. His instincts have been proven right, and I, as someone who's fought on the ground twice in both Iraq and Afghanistan, I can tell you he is dead spot on.
So the numbers on the number of senior Pentagon brass who transition seamlessly into the defense industry are pretty shocking. I know some of them, they're good, patriotic people. But there's also corruption, and the system gives the appearance of corruption, that's for sure, and shakes the country's faith in its military leadership. Why is this allowed?
Well, I'll tell you, because it is an institutional morass, I suppose, because every colonel wants to be a general, every one-star general wants to be a two-star general, et cetera. So it absolutely bakes into the calculation that you can't go against the status quo, and that if you want to be a next commander, you have to get a command. So you have to have a war to fight in. You have to have a place to deploy to. That's how you get moved up the chain. And so the system actually predicates that.
Yeah. Well, it definitely is a corrupting influence. I think it's pretty clear. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
You may have seen the news today about Bob Woodward's new book, which apparently spends 480 pages trashing the president. It's coming out next week, just in time to influence the election. None of that should surprise you. Bob Woodward dislikes Donald Trump. He's been very clear about that. Woodward works for Jeff Bezos' personal newspaper, The Washington Post, which has made defeating Donald Trump its all-consuming mission. So, of course, Bob Woodward's book is exactly what you thought it would be. What's surprising is that Donald Trump participated in making the book. The president sat for repeated interviews with Bob Woodward. Why in the world would he do that? Well, tonight, from a source who knows the answer to that mystery, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. It was Lindsey Graham who helped convince Donald Trump to talk to Bob Woodward. Lindsey Graham brokered that meeting. Lindsey Graham even sat in on the first interview between Bob Woodward and the president. How'd that turn out? Now, remember, Lindsey Graham is supposed to be a Republican, so why would he do something like that? You'd have to ask him. But keep in mind that Lindsey Graham has opposed, passionately opposed, virtually every major policy initiative that Donald Trump articulated when he first ran, from ending illegal immigration to pulling back from pointless wars to maintaining law and order at home. Lindsey Graham was against all of that more than many Democrats. So maybe you already know the answer. Up next, the salon owner who exposed Nancy Pelosi's maskless hypocrisy now says radicals have descended on her business and destroyed it. We'll talk to her after the break. Plus, we'll have more exclusive tape from CNN's chief bodybuilder. Turns out Jeff Zucker wasn't the only one giving advice to Michael Cohen. The audio is amazing. We'll play it for you. It's official. No one is allowed to ask Speaker Nancy Pelosi about her illegal trip to the hair salon in San Francisco last week, and so nobody does. And by the way, when you're in trouble, go on MSNBC because they follow the rules on this. Pelosi sat for 14 minutes for an interview on MSNBC on Sunday. She wasn't asked a single time about why she violated her own party's lockdown restrictions to get her hair done. She also wasn't asked why she wasn't wearing a mask at the time. Now remember, according to Nancy Pelosi herself, not wearing a mask is immoral. Watch.
Members and staff will be required to wear masks at all times.
This is a mask from all over the country. I'm getting these masks.
Real men wear masks, and these masks are essentially important. The chair views the failure to wear a mask as a serious breach of decorum.
I have no advice for them, except when they come here, they have to wear a mask.
I totally agree with Joe Biden. As long as we're faced with this crisis, the mask should be mandatory.
But in any case, I'm a big believer in wearing the mask and not sharing any, shall we say, air unnecessarily.
The second they take power, they crush you, they humiliate you. Wear your mask. Wear your mask. We're going to look back on this moment in horror and embarrassment. And then they didn't even follow their own rules. Meanwhile, Erica Kayas, who owns the salon in question, says her business has been completely destroyed because she told the truth about what happened. Erica Kayas joins us tonight with an update on that story. Erica, thanks so much for coming on. I was just interested in hearing whatever happened. All of a sudden, you went from being just a salon owner in a city, trying to cope with the lockdowns, to being a very famous person, and then the camera receded from you. What happened next?
Well, I don't want to be known as famous, but I started to just get a ton of phone calls, text messages, emails, all my Yelp reviews, just saying that they hope I go under and that I fail. So just a lot of negativity towards my business.
So what does that mean for the business?
That means that I am actually done in San Francisco and closing my doors, unfortunately.
Because you told the truth about the Speaker of the House, you're not a political person, I should say again. You told the truth about a politician violating her own rules in your store. You have to close the store and go out of business.
Yes, I'm actually afraid to go back just because of the messages and emails I've been getting. So, yeah. It's a little scary and sad. I do have a lot of positive calls and text messages from, clients, but other than that, nothing but negativity.
You're afraid to physically go back to the city of San Francisco?
I am right now, yes.
You're from this country. I assume you grew up here. You sound like you did.
Yes, yes.
Did you ever imagine that you would live in a place where you'd be in danger just going to a city for saying something that's true?
No, never. I mean, I've been there for 15 years. I've never felt that way about San Francisco. But unfortunately, it's going down a path that a lot of people feel that way. I'm not the only one. I mean, obviously, I'm the only one in this situation, but a lot of people are leaving. They're feeling unsafe. Yeah, it's sad.
So you're just going to keep the shop closed?
Yes. Yeah.
So much destroyed. Well, Godspeed. We are rooting for you, and I hope you rebuild somewhere else.
Thank you.
More hospitable. Thanks. Erica Kais, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, a professor at a major university, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., has admitted that she lied about being black for her entire career. In this white supremacist country, she pretended to be African American. Remarkable story, with remarkable video to accompany it. We'll show it to you next. Here's a characteristically bizarre story from the world of higher education. A professor at George Washington University in the nation's capital has resigned after admitting that she's been lying about who she really is. For years, she's pretended to be a black woman. The professor is a woman called Jessica Krug, and she admitted in a blog post that she had abandoned her, quote, lived experience as a white Jewish child in suburban Kansas City, and instead decided to adopt a new identity rooted in, quote, North African blackness and Caribbean-rooted Bronx blackness. Of course, during her career, Krug wrote a scholarship, air quotes attached, about racial issues that, needless to say, was well regarded by the same academic leaders who rewarded Elizabeth Warren with the American Indian chair at Harvard. Krug pretended for years and occasionally was caught on camera pretending to be someone she's not. Watch this.
I got a couple of things to say, and when y'all come on and tell me my time stops, out of here. It's been 7 hours. Not only did I have to listen to these cops, and not just the cops, but to be honest with y'all, city council members, you posing like you opposing them for your sound bites, for your social media, for your re-election campaigns. Out of here. You've been supporting the cops in the pandemic.
So that apparently is how white liberal academics think black people talk. Pretty revealing, really. Jason Whitlock is a writer with Outkick.com, and he joins us tonight. Jason Whitlock, thanks so much for coming on. What can we learn from this? It feels like there are lessons embedded in this story, and it's not the only one like it.
Tucker, this really blows my mind, but where we've gone in this country is that there is a business built around racial grievance. And that business is booming at such a level that white people are like, hey, I'm going to adopt a whole new identity so I can benefit from being baby Al Sharpton, baby Jesse Jackson. And in academia, this is being embraced, and she's been able to pull off this scam. But it's not just her. This isn't just an anecdote. We've had it with Rachel Dolezal. We've had it with the Sean King guy on Twitter, who is white, who has pretended to be black, who has lied and said that, oh, my mother slept with a black man and she didn't tell anybody about it. All of these people moving into the race bait industry and business, and it must be very profitable and lucrative because everybody wants to be down with the cause. And y'all know that Jessica Krug is just keeping it real, yo.
But so that's the thing. That's what struck me so forcefully. Here's an academic with advanced degrees who, when she wants to sound African American, doesn't sound like Langston Hughes. She sounds like someone who's illiterate. So what does that tell you that she thinks about black people? It's so patronizing.
Tucker, I keep trying to explain it over and over and over again, and people think I'm crazy. The branding has been so strong that if you put on this label of being a liberal, there's virtually nothing you can do negative against black people that will be seen as negative. White liberals, I'm sorry, they're the actual bigots. Yeah. And I know that that's going to blow a lot of people's minds, but liberalism, to me, is now the new KKK hood. Bigots used to hide under hoods. Now they hide under the label of being a liberal and a progressive, and that allows you to be as bigoted as you want to be. If you want to call yourself an anti-fascist and support Black Lives Matter as a white person, that means you can go out into the street, tear down neighborhoods, harass people, say all kinds of disrespectful stuff to white and black people, and it's all good because allegedly you're fighting racism. Allegedly you're on the side of black people. And actually, if you evaluate their actions and their mindset, they actually can't stand black people, have no respect for black people, think very little of black people, and certainly aren't working towards our benefit. The world is just upside down. It's a big lie and a scam. And people are, I call it like white liberals are going out on a black person's credit card and making up a bunch of charges, charging up a bunch of things that we have to pay the bill for. They're doing it in our name. This is crazy.
Well, you mentioned Al Sharpton. There was an amazing quote from him, I think, yesterday, and you think of Al Sharpton as this radical, but Al Sharpton on television yesterday said, wait a second, defund the police? That's a latte liberal idea. If you have to live in a tough neighborhood, you don't want to get rid of all the police because you're the one who could get killed.
If you're a white liberal and you'd like to see more African Americans murdered, supporting the defunding of the police is the best way to accomplish that. The murder rates in all these cities where the hostility towards police is astronomical, where the disrespect for the police is astronomical, and the police are justifiably pulling back because it's like, I don't want to get caught up in this. I don't want to be accused of being a racist and have my life destroyed. The murder rates in those communities are going up. If you evaluate the actions of these white liberals who claim they're fighting for equality, evaluate their actions and then evaluate the results of their actions.
Exactly.
And it paints them as the true racists.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Jason Whitlock, a bold thing to say. I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So sometimes when you watch news shows, particularly political shows on CNN, you get the feeling, well, this seems kind of scripted. Well, there's a reason for that. It turns out sometimes it is literally scripted. Up ahead, we have tape of a CNN anchor scripting a segment with a guest. It's amazing. Over the past week, we played you recordings of a couple of well-known figures at CNN. Chris CUOMO, who's the 9 p.m. anchor there, and then Jeff Zucker, who's the president of the network, speaking to their friend Michael Cohen in very unguarded ways. If you've heard the tapes, you know that CUOMO and Zucker are not at all what they seem to be. In public, both of them are sanctimonious moralizers. They're given to lectures about propriety and racism and white privilege. But in private, let's just say, they are definitely not that way. Zucker and CUOMO, in other words, are frauds, just like the channel they work for. Despite its name, CNN is not a cable news network. It is a slickly produced propaganda loop. Every topic CNN covers has been chosen for its political effect. Every word its anchors speak has been curated to manipulate you. Nothing winds up on CNN by accident. The whole thing is a scripted drama written for the benefit of the Democratic Party. That's not overstatement. Tonight we have proof. This is a conversation that took place in 2018 between CNN anchor Chris CUOMO and his friend, the disgraced felon lawyer Michael Cohen. The two spoke in person. Cohen wanted Cuomo to prepare him for an interview he'd been asked to do on CNN. As Michael Cohen put it, he wanted, quote, guidance as a friend more than anything. Chris Cuomo was happy to oblige. But before we play you the exchange between the two of them, listen first to how Michael Cohen describes his interaction with another CNN anchor.
I'm going to ask you for your advice on how to handle the interview that I'm doing first with you. Erin Burnett wants me to do hers first. So she goes, yeah, but it's better if I do it with a woman as opposed to with you. I said,
well, you're not accused of bothering a woman.
I said, but Chris is a woman.
So there you have a news anchor telling a potential guest that he better talk to her first because she's a woman. At CNN, everything is about identity politics. But regardless of the sex of the anchor, Michael Cohen was worried about doing the interview because he knew he'd get questions about the payments he made to Stormy Daniels. He wanted Chris Cuomo to tell him what to say. Now, on TV, Cuomo might have launched into a lecture about how it's wrong to send money to strippers. But in private, he skipped that lecture. You will be asked that, Chris Cuomo told Michael Cohen, and you can say, I did it for him, for Donald Trump. My relationship has always been for him. I've always said I don't speak for the campaign. I speak for him as his attorney. Cuomo went on to elaborate, quote, and to the question of motive, he told Cohen, the response would have to be, you can speculate as to why you think I did it all day long, but the only answer is my answer, and I just told you why I did it. You don't get to speculate because if you can't prove that I got paid back by Trump or the campaign, it is slander and defamation for you to say that I did. Now, there's no record of whether Michael Cohen was taking notes as Chris Cuomo was talking. He should have been taking notes because the script that Cuomo provided him is time-tested. It's the classic last chance defense of the obviously guilty. When you don't have a good answer, threaten the person who's asking the question, in this case with a defamation suit. Cuomo seemed certain that would work on CNN. Then he gamed out what would happen next when Cohen went on his own channel. Quote, I think the way this conversation goes is almost exactly the way we're having it right now, which is where I say, this looks shady, and you say it looks shady to you because you're coming in with a specific intention. Again, Cuomo advised Cohen to attack the anchor. That's effective. But it's not clear that Cohen understood what he was saying. On the tape, some of Michael Cohen's responses to Chris Cuomo seem disjointed. Others sound like he's grunting. Perhaps to make it easier for Michael Cohen to follow, Chris Cuomo began acting out both sides of the exchange. He acted out the news anchor's question, and then he acted out Cohen's scripted response to that question. The conversation devolved into a kind of one-man play with Chris Cuomo as the performer and Michael Cohen as the audience. Here's one act.
And why didn't you just let it all come out and let the people decide? Because it's not a fair process.
It's right.
They wouldn't have had any of the counterfacts, and they would have had her. You know, if she was somehow convinced to do it, and people decided to believe that her denials were somehow less true than her admissions. I didn't want to play that game. Everything was tilted against Mr. Trump. And that's what it is. And then either they'll believe it or they'll be like, that. There's no way he didn't know.
Pretty tricky. Chris Cuomo sounds like he's got some experience making excuses. But the bigger point is this. Sometimes when you watch a political show on television, you'll notice the dialogue seems unnatural, almost like parts of it have been scripted. Well, at CNN, that is literally what you are seeing. Scripted conversation. What you just heard there was the writers' meeting before the show. But Chris Cuomo was just starting. He then told Cohen how to dodge questions about a shell corporation Cohen had used to make payments to Stormy Daniels. Quote, I'm not being shady, Cuomo instructed Michael Cohen to say on television. I was being legal, and I did it my right way. You're wrong about the LLC. I've used it for other things. I have tons of LLCs. I did not form it just to do this. And even if I had, my whole point would have been to keep it quiet. But that happens to just not be true, end quote. Well, that's slick. But in case that excuse didn't work, Chris Cuomo advised Michael Cohen once again to attack the person asking the question. Quote, unlike the media who is reporting on this, I don't like to say things just because they're convenient when they're untrue. Again, there is no record of how much of this Michael Cohen was absorbing or was capable of absorbing, given his natural limitations. But Chris Cuomo kept writing the script for him anyway. The CNN anchor is going to ask you, quote, why didn't you just let it all out and let the people decide? Good question. And at this point, there's a long pause in the tape. Michael Cohen clearly doesn't have any idea what the answer should be. But Chris Cuomo knows exactly what to say. So he jumps back in and takes Michael Cohen's part of the colloquy once again. Quote, "Because it's not a fair process," Chris Cuomo barks. "They wouldn't have had any of the counterfacts. If people had decided to believe her denials were less true than her admissions, I didn't want to play that game. Everything was tilted against Mr. Trump," said Chris Cuomo. Well, at this point, Michael Cohen starts to get it. So Chris Cuomo decides to take the training wheels off and act out the scene together. Here it is.
It looks shady. Yeah, okay, fine. Look, it's a shady business. I didn't like that I had
Politics is a shady business.
Right, I didn't like that I had to pay her to keep her quiet just in case she decided to lie again because somebody was paying her.
It goes on like this, and on, and on, and on. Chris Cuomo writing the script for a live interview on his own network that hasn't yet taken place. He gives it his all. He tries his hardest. He plumbs the depth of his legal well. But in the end, Chris Cuomo clearly still senses that his friend Michael Cohen could be in serious legal trouble anyway. So he offers to get the big guns involved. Listen.
How do you get in trouble? You don't get in trouble legally. I'll ask, I'm going to make some phone calls on that and make sure that you can't get.
You heard that. I'm going to make some phone calls and make sure you don't get blank. Presumably you don't get indicted. Chris Cuomo offers that help to Michael Cohen unsolicited. And honestly, it's a lot more than most news anchors would do for a guest, we can tell you firsthand. Did Chris Cuomo call his brother, the governor of New York, on behalf of Michael Cohen? We don't know the answer to that. We do know that whatever Chris Cuomo did, it didn't work. In the end, Michael Cohen went to prison anyway. But Chris Cuomo did try. Even back then, Cuomo understood that Michael Cohen could be useful someday. And indeed, Michael Cohen definitely has been useful. Tonight, 2 months before the presidential election, Michael Cohen is appearing on CNN in primetime to make the case against Donald Trump. In other words, in the end, it all paid off. Well, we have new data tonight, new numbers, new science on the coronavirus and its spread across this country. Good news to report, really good news. No one is talking about this. We are, though. We'll be right back. Pictures are remarkable, apocalyptic, really. Several large wildfires raging across the western part of the country have turned the sky above San Francisco orange today, literally orange. More than 5,000 total square miles have burned so far in places like Oregon and the state of Washington. Rick Leventhal has an update for us from California tonight. Hey, Rick.
Hey, Tucker, an unprecedented amount of wildfires just scorching the West Coast. Here in California, 50 new fires ignited overnight. 28 major blazes burning right now. That's the worst in this state's history. We have live images for you from Hillsboro, Oregon. That state also on fire tonight. 3 or 4 mega blazes, as they call them, the worst in 120 years, according to the governor, who says this could be the largest loss of property in that state's history. Hundreds of residences have already burned, at least 2 deaths now being blamed on that. And here in the state of California, as you mentioned, San Francisco, the skies are orange. Massive and extremely dense smoke clouds have just created this layer over that city, an ominous glow. The air unhealthy to breathe. Drivers were forced to turn on their headlights. Towers, office towers did the same. Roughly 2.3 million acres have burned. Here in California alone, there are 14,000 firefighters struggling to gain control of these fires, Tucker. Some of them are now under control, but many of them are not tonight.
Big story. Rick Leventhal, thank you.
Sure.
Meanwhile, around the country, new cases of the coronavirus are down to levels we haven't seen since late June. Deaths have plummeted to their lowest levels in months. These are positive numbers, very hopeful, good news, and yet they're being largely ignored. Why is that? Dr. Mark Siegel is a Fox News medical contributor. He joins us with details on this tonight. Hey, doctor.
Hi, Tucker.
Good news tonight out of the United States and out of New York City. I'm reporting to you from New York, from the heart of New York tonight. Now, we were among the first back in end of January to warn about how scary this virus is when no one else was reporting it. Now, we're going to be the first to report some good news. Everyone worrying about after the Labor Day weekend, but I want to report that in the United States, over the last 2 weeks, new cases are down 13%, deaths are down 25%, and over the last 3 days, we're having a dramatic decrease, less than 30,000 new cases across the United States over the last 3 days post-Labor Day weekend. We're still keeping an eye on that. Now, here in New York City, I'm around looking for a restaurant tonight. Almost impossible to find one, Tucker. And the problem in New York is, even though the cases have gone way down, to the last 24 hours, less than 300 new cases in New York, we still remain in a lockdown situation. Good news, New York City mayor says today they're going to reopen the restaurants on September 30th. Now, how they're going to reopen them is 25% occupancy, everybody wearing personal protective equipment, the employees, tables 6 feet apart. Now, it's not going to feel like the restaurant that you're used to, but at least the restaurants are open. So, partially, Tucker, finally tonight, I want to say this. Cases very, very low in New York, but the effect of these extensive lockdowns, emotional, physical, and economic, remain extremely high. Tucker?
It's unbelievable. Remarkable the country's put up with it. Dr. Siegel, great to see you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, the Oscars have gone completely woke in a way that would have been unimaginable even 6 months ago. Mark Stein joins us tomorrow to discuss that. He has some ideas for diverse movies that might win awards in Hollywood. You're not going to want to miss that. We'll be back, too. We're out of time tonight, but tomorrow night, 8 p.m., the show that is the sworn enemy of lying pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. We will see you then. In the meantime, have a great evening handing off in New York to Sean Hannity.